welcome. It's so great to be with you all again today. If I haven't met you yet, Shawn Johnson at the University of Montana, and I feel very fortunate to help play a supporting role with the California Landscape Stewardship Network. And one of the things that I've also been doing is serving as facilitator for these cutting green tape exchanges. It's been so fun to be kind of an outsider looking in on this process and be a part of, at least at arm's length, a community that's so engaged, so connected to place, so willing to think innovatively about how you're doing things differently to reach towards the outcomes that you care about for people, for place, for culture, and for the future. And so it's just great to be with you all. I think these exchanges have really grown and evolved over time. And I want to thank you all for being part of that evolution. Your voice, your contributions, your insights about how we spend this time together are so important, and how we continue to use this space and utilize it in new and different ways to make sure that we're making the most out of our time together. Just a couple of things as we jump on. If you haven't yet had a chance to say hi, please feel free to jump over into the chat box and say a quick hello. Always great to just get an update from each of you and what you're doing and where you're coming from in your work and how that connects to our shared work here as we talk about cutting green tape. In terms of just kind of the logistics for the day, all the usual stuff. If you're not talking, just ask that you stay on mute for both audio and visual, and use other tools. Use the chat box, use the Q&A, excuse me, raise your hand, share links in the chat, whatever it might be, to help us all stay connected and engaged, and also to hear one another as well as we can. Also wanted to just remind folks that we do record these, and so you see the recording button is now on in the upper left-hand corner, just to remind people that this is something that we want to share with others who can't be here with us today, and that is happening. If you're not familiar yet with the California Landscape Stewardship Network, I'd invite you to check them out. I think Devin might drop a link into the chat for what that group is. And I would like being a part of that network and that community, in part because they're all about bringing people together to examine needs, explore opportunities, and build conversations like this that have co-evolved with you all, with California Natural Resources Agency and others, to bring forward new ideas and innovations that both build on the past and look towards the future. So really about finding that forum, that space to connect, to convene, and to catalyze. I think that's it in terms of most of the table setting for today. I think there may be a couple of chats or chat box links that you'll see dropped from our support staff. If you haven't yet read the Regulatory Efficiencies Cutting Green Tape report, want to make sure that you know where that's at. There's California Natural Resource Agency's update on cutting green tape and progress. And then the California Landscape Stewardship Network has an ongoing cutting green tape website where additional resources are posted, and invite you to take a look when you have a moment to dive deeper on all of those different topics. In terms of our roadmap for today, pretty straightforward. We want to continue doing what we've done in the past, which is share updates, insights, stories, and connections, bright spots, how we're continuing to learn, to co-evolve, to work together. It's hard to believe that it's been 6 months since the March convening, but a lot has happened since then. And so we want to go through and talk about some of that. We, as usual, want to start with a little bit of who's in the room. And so we've got a short poll set up here just to give a better sense of who you are and what you're bringing and what geographies you represent. We'll then have a chance to connect again with Secretary Wade Crowfoot and hear his latest thinking and points of inspiration for us as we continue to work together. We've got a couple new Hidden Hero awards to share, and so super excited about that. We've got a SERP Program spotlight. So how's that going? What are we learning? What's going on in the SERP world? And then keep going from there. So Devin, if you want to go to the next slide. Got some breaking news. We've got an exciting case study that's been underway that shares the story and evolution of cutting green tape, and how that in and of itself is something to learn from and reflect on. And then want to bring together today's conversation with both some closing thoughts and synthesis, but also looking ahead. And we'll plan to get you out the door by 2 o'clock today. And it's great to see people continuing to jump online and say hi. Great to see some familiar names pop up there as well. So that's our overview of the day. I want to turn next to the Poll Everywhere link, Devin, and just get a sense of who's in the room. So I don't know if you've got that link in front of you, but go ahead and drop that link in the chat box, and if you want to share your screen at the same time. There it is. So you just see Devin dropped a link in the chat to polleverywhere.com, and then he's sharing a screen. Little click on the map exercise to get us started here. Once you follow that, you should be able to just point and click to where you're joining us today, and then we'll get to see those results. And it's nice just to see the geographic distribution. And Devin, I'm wondering if you're showing the results or the question itself, because that looks like you're in submit mode. So we'll get the technology here figured out in just a second. And I like how you guys are going to submitting that in the chat too, so we get a good sense of where is it. There we go. Look at that. Lots of people joining, a lot of people from the Bay Area and Sacramento area, which is great. Some people up the North Coast, down south, up in the Sierras. So really cool to see people Central Coast joining from all over the state and being part of this conversation. Looks like a couple more folks are still submitting, but let's go ahead and move to the next question. So really curious to know who's here. You know, is this your first conversation? Have you been part of 1, 2 to 4, or more than 5 Cutting Green Tapes events? There's been a series of in-person roundtables, conversations, webinars. Looks like really good diversity of connection to this initiative. A fair number of people who are here for the first time. So really welcome those voices, and certainly be curious to hear from you guys in particular after this is done, what resonated and how we can shape future conversations in a way that builds from your experiences and insights as well. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Main affiliation. So quite a few folks joining us from government agencies and the nonprofit world, a few consultants, a few others. There we go, a couple folks from a foundation perspective. I should be answering this so that there's one academic institution on there. And sometimes we have tribal government folks with us, or people who are affiliated with tribal efforts, and it doesn't look like we've got those voices with us today, but certainly looking for the breadth and depth of diversity of voices who are engaged in conversations that are connected to Cutting Green Tape initiative and everything that means to our communities and to our shared efforts. And is there one more, Devin?
That should be it for those, Shawn.
That's it? Okay. Well, appreciate you guys doing that. It's really helpful for our presenters, for me as the facilitator, to just get a sense of who you are, where you're joining us from, kind of your organizational perspective. And then certainly we're very interested in learning more about your work, your insights, and your experiences out in your community and in the landscape. So with that, I have the honor and privilege of introducing Secretary Wade Crowfoot again. I really feel like this is in part such a special community because of the leadership role that he holds in this space. He provides insight, connection, and inspiration that continues to inform and advance our efforts. And at the same time, he does a great job leaving space for co-creation, for collaboration, for the evolution of the conversation in a way that truly integrates the depth and the complexity of the issues across scale. So Secretary Wade Crowfoot, I don't know where my language is today. Great to see you again. And thanks for joining us. I'll just turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks so much, Shawn. And you probably don't know this in Montana. Well, you probably do because it's been all over the news. This has been a hell of a week across California. breaking records left and right in terms of extreme heat. So just first of all, huge thanks to everybody for the role you played in maintaining reliability, and I hope everybody is safe. You know, I'm friends with Beth Pratt from, as you know, the National Wildlife Federation, who's a champion of wildlife connectivity. And she shared a tweet yesterday of a deer outside of her sliding glass window up in the mountains by Yosemite, where it was 113 degrees. And she mused that the deer probably had never experienced that level of extreme heat and was probably looking for shelter. So, you know, to me, this is a reminder of the urgency of the work that we do. For those who are joining for the first time, you know, this effort is all about bringing together folks who want to get environmental improvement, environmental restoration done more quickly and cost effectively than in the past. And the origin story for this Cutting the Green Tape effort is when the Landscape Stewardship Network came to our team at the Natural Resources Agency shortly after we took office and said, hey, you know, it takes far too long and it's far too expensive to actually get environmentally beneficial work done in the state. And they provided examples that sometimes upwards of a third of a project's budget is spent on planning and permitting. And if you think about the work we need to do to help restore nature across our state, especially amidst climate change, I think we all agree that the status quo is untenable. We have to deliver environmental improvements, environmental restoration more quickly and effectively and cost effectively. And that really created the Cutting the Green Tape initiative. Incredible leadership from Joaquin Esquivel and the Water Board staff, Chuck Bonham and the Fish and Wildlife staff, Karen Ross at Department of Food and Agriculture. I'm just giving voice to Newsom administration officials that are all committed to this. Today, we're joined by Amy Hutzel, the Executive Officer of our Coastal Conservancy, and Campbell Ingram, the Executive Officer of our Delta Conservancy, and likely others. You know, we all know that climate change is on the march, and we all know that's providing a real threat to our communities, both our human communities and our natural communities, whether it's wildfire or the worsening drought, or extreme heat, or catastrophic flooding and sea level rise. We know there is a ton of work that we have to do to protect our natural places and our human communities from the impacts of climate change. And that's why this initiative is so critical. I'm actually here in Mexicali, Mexico, working on border issues with our Mexican partners, including pollution reduction of the New River that flows from Mexico to California, our work to stabilize the Salton Sea, and our broader work to try to stabilize the Colorado River system. But I wanted to zoom into this discussion because to me, you know, this coming together of leaders, including yourselves, is among the single most important convenings that we're helping to put together in government. I want to say please and thank you. Thank you for the work that you're already doing. We're seeing the fruits of our collective labor in the work that's happening to get projects done more quickly. Big thanks if you're a member of an environmental organization or a nonprofit partner for your patience and your creativity working with those in government. And huge thanks if you're part of our state government or local or federal government, tribal government. You all are leading the way, making sure that we don't just default to the status quo, but we find ways to make the environmental improvements we need to with the urgency that we need. So that's the thanks to all the work that everybody's doing. And I'm really gratified that we get to continue to acknowledge what we call hidden heroes today, who are people that are demonstrating their creativity and really putting their leadership on the line to help us do things better across organizations. And so that's the thank you. The please is focused on please keep it up. Please help us continue to deliver this work with the urgency that the crises we face provide. You know, we talk about the climate crisis. We obviously also have a biodiversity crisis across our planet. We're one of the biodiversity hotspots of our planet, and we know we have real challenges to protect our own biodiversity. And the work that we're helping to deliver more quickly and effectively through Cutting the Green Tape is going to address that. We have a tremendous opportunity. State leaders, the governor, the legislature just finished a budget process that allocates, depending on how you cut it, upwards of $2 billion for nature, some through our agency, some through our sister agencies. So I would say we have more funding than we've ever had to make the improvements that we know our natural communities need, and frankly, that support our human communities. And given the crises we face, we have to use that funding more effectively and deploy it more quickly than we ever have. So I think the work we do has never been more important. And I'm really thankful, and I feel fortunate that, you know, we are the people that are helping to address this crisis. It's challenging. It can often be discouraging as we look around and literally feel the acceleration of climate change, but it's also an incredible gift that we all have to actually make a difference in California and to our natural world. So I'm excited to be here as always, and thank you for the work that you do. You'll hear from my colleague, Jen Norris, at the end of our discussion here today. Jen is our Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat. She and her team are spearheading this cutting green tape on behalf of our agency, and then of course, spearheading the complementary work with our 30 by 30 effort to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. We also have colleagues like Amanda Hansen, who's driving our natural and working lands strategy to really focus on improving our land management for climate smart land management, and exciting things happening there around setting a set of ambitious targets for carbon sequestration on lands. So I'll stop here. I'm just trying to give you a dose of encouragement and energy as we convene the discussion here today. Big thanks, Shawn, and everyone who helped bring us here today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Wade. It's always good to see you, and thanks for joining us from Mexico. It sounds like really important conversations that you're having down there. So really appreciate you carving out the time. And just to emphasize a couple of things you said, the urgency and the complexity of the moment really is calling for the kind of innovation and creativity that this community is bringing. And let's not be constrained by our institutional stereotypes. The NGO folks, the academic sector, the government sector can really think creatively about how we can do the things that we've always historically done well, but also use our strengths and leverage them in ways where we can complement each other and have the impact that we're looking for across the community. I'd also just say a little bit tongue in cheek that we often despise, maybe a little bit of a strong word, some of the influences of California in Montana. We see a lot of influence, I'll say, from California, and certainly we're feeling the heat impacts this week here too. In northern or north central Montana, it's 95 degrees, which is very unusual today. But the kind of innovation that's permeating throughout the state right now and is not just helping there, it's helping inspire conversations here too. And so thank you guys so much for the work you're doing, and just wanted to let you know that it's resonating well beyond your state boundaries. Do want to pick up where Wade left with introducing Jen Norris. I know she's going to come on later too, but want to invite her and Kellyx Nelson to the screen right now to have that celebratory moment for a couple of our latest hidden heroes and present those latest awards. So Kellyx and Jen, if you guys want to come online, I'll just turn it over to you.
You're on mute, Kellyx.
Kellyx, you're muted.
The funny thing is that while I was on mute, what I was asking was whether my video was on.
Your video's on and we can hear you. Go for it.
That's great. Well, thank you. It is definitely my pleasure to be able to present this award. The Cutting Green Tape Hidden Hero Award recognizes the innovation and dedication of public employees who are increasing the pace and scale of environmental stewardship in California. These hidden heroes are working with creativity and commitment to improve governmental processes, going above and beyond, so that we can implement natural resource goals and plans more effectively and cost efficiently, while maintaining fidelity to California's environmental protection standards. And I am delighted to present these awards today to Madeline Cavalieri with the California State Coastal Commission, and Shannon with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. we see your work and we're so grateful for your tremendous contributions. And just thrilled to be able to recognize what you've done. We see you. And I don't know, Jen, if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Well, thanks, Kellyx, and thanks to you both for your great work. I was listening to the secretary's remarks, and I was thinking about, one, how exciting it is that we're bringing all these people together to talk about cutting green tape, but also in my head realizing it's not really sexy work, right? It's not like, it's all the hard stuff of making these rules work in a way that makes sense. And to really be more efficient and more effective takes creativity, it takes dedication. And so I love that we're starting with the hidden heroes, because every single time we do this, it takes people being creative and being thoughtful and really taking risks. And so I just want to acknowledge both of you, Jake and Madeline. I'm so excited to offer this award to both of you. Congratulations and thank you. We appreciate you so much. And I think we want to see if you want to say anything, just because we won't embarrass you.
Sure. Madeline, do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
You can go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you both. Thanks so much. It means a lot to be recognized by this group. I feel like you've already kind of touched on some of the corny things I was going to say, but I'll say some of them anyway. You know, being a regulator isn't the most romantic or exciting cog to be in the whole restoration process, but it feels really good, and it's really gratifying to help other folks move their projects forward and help them do the good work that they do and navigate the whole regulatory system. So I really like what I do, and I really like to work with the folks that I work with. And I guess while I have the mic, I wanted to do a little plug and thank my boss and mentor, Jonathan Warmerdam, because he's really kind of showed me the way the last bunch of years and kind of helped me form my philosophy on how I do my job. So thanks everybody, and excited to keep helping folks out as time goes forward.
That's awesome.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to receive this award, and have really enjoyed the work that I've been seeing and participating in over the last couple of years. As Secretary Crowfoot alluded to, I think this week we're really feeling the urgency really acutely around needing to act on climate change adaptation, and Coastal Commission and its staff are really motivated to ensure that restoration and resilience projects are happening quickly in the coastal zone. I think I've seen a real turning point at our agency and also across the state in just understanding the importance of regulatory agencies as collaborative partners that can help guide projects towards outcomes that are consistent with the state's environmental laws, and therefore can be expedited for permitting, and can really see the great projects happening on the ground that we are already seeing that pace and scale increasing. So it's been really exciting, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. I recognize, Madeline, that you're in the middle of a Coastal Commission meeting, so I know that, so I appreciate you coming for this. Jake also wanted to second kudos to Jonathan Warmerdam, who is an extraordinary contributor in this space, and also wanted to let you both know that there was no hesitation when your names came up. It was pretty immediate consensus. So your reputations precede your coming onto the screen, and there's a lot of appreciation. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I guess we'll pass the virtual mic back over to.
We have to show the goods. Hold on.
Yeah, I don't know if Sharon is. Oh, there we go. There is.
So I've got these certificates, which you will receive not in floppy form. So these are signed by the secretary, by the network, by Joaquin and Karen. Everyone appreciates the work that you all do. And Sharon, I think, has the really cool stuff. There we go. Look at that. Isn't that cool?
Right.
Congratulations,
Thank
both
you
of
so
you.
much. And now we'll pass our virtual mic back over to Shawn. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, congratulations, Jake and Madeline. Super cool. Well deserved. May not be the sexiest work ever, but some of the most impactful work I can imagine. And so thank you for the role you play, the influence you have, and for being those hidden heroes who are perhaps not so hidden anymore after we've just given you a nice award to hang on your shelf, but really well-deserved, and congratulations. Do you want to actually not let Kellyx go too far away? I'd like to invite Kellyx back on the screen with me for this next segment of our agenda, and then also invite Brad Henderson forward with the DFW. And we want to move next into a little bit of a progress update discussion around what's happening with SERP, the statutory exemption for restoration projects. Really exciting developments to share. And so I'm going to just get out of the way. And I think Brad's going to start with a quick little update, and then we'll get into a conversation. So Brad, I'm going to just invite you to share your update. And then when you get ready to invite Kellyx forward to engage in conversation, just give a shout.
All right, well, let's do that. Thanks so much. And you know, I think Kellyx's basic question was, well, what's going on? What are you working on? And it's a lot. We have a lot of things going on. I'll start with one really important development that's occurred since March, and that is that our Cutting the Green Tape statewide strike team is fully in place, fully hired, and working on projects statewide. We're continuing to develop and implement our Cutting the Green Tape permitting tools. That includes the restoration management permit and the restoration consistency determination. Both of those tools are forms of take authorizations for restoration, with, you know, really the basic idea that you have to work where these protected species live in order to save them. And this really removes barriers to doing work in those locations. We're constantly working on the processes that go along with these new permits. We're always looking at our procedures, our templates, and that's really a great way to get at this low-hanging fruit. Is there a way to make this a little easier, a little better for project proponents, for partners, and even for ourselves, really, because anything that can save a little time does speed up the pace and scale of restoration. And finally, just in general, we're pursuing several new initiatives, which really won't have time to get into today, but maybe at a future meeting. So what we're really here to talk about today is the SERP exemption, the new statutory exemption for restoration projects, which is actually going to become 1 year old here in September, and in a little bit longer than that since the first one was approved. But let's go on and talk about a few updates here. We're working on about 50 SERP exemptions all over California, from the Salton Sea to the Smith River, and from the Trinity Alps to downtown LA, and lots of projects in between. We worked with a variety of lead agencies and really a diversity of lead agencies in California. So not just the ones that we see over and over again, but we've been seeing some new cities and new counties and new state agencies that we might not typically work with as a lead agency. And I think that SERP has helped to break down some of those barriers. We've noticed that there are some really meaningful cost savings that can go along with SERP, since you really don't have to create a CEQA environmental document, and instead you're doing a very focused analysis. And so we did a survey and talked with people who've successfully gone through the process, and those cost savings have ranged up to over $500,000 per project, which is really significant. And as those add up, those savings, we hope, are going to, it's going to mean that that money that was saved is going to be recycled back into doing more restoration projects. Time savings that we're hearing about from successful SERP graduates have ranged from about 2.5 months to 10 months. How long does it take to go through SERP? And there's really two main steps. The lead agency has work to do. They prepare their own determinations based on substantial evidence and best available science, which is really the standard for this process. It's a little bit more work than just doing a categorical exemption. And so the amount of lead agency time to work on those documents is obviously quite reduced. And what we're seeing is that usually that analysis requires about 10 pages or less of document prep. And of course, we'll look at any other documents that might go along with the project, like a basis of design report or anything like that. But that analysis itself is pretty tight and pretty short. so that's really encouraging. And of course, as we go through this over and over again, lead agencies learn, we learn, we're all learning together. We hope to make this process, even more streamlined. But what we've seen so far in our first fiscal year, at least, of working on SERP is that it's averaging about 40 days from the time we receive the request until the director's concurrence is sent out. And so that's not bad. And we've had some that have taken a lot less than that, and we've had a couple that have gone a little bit over that, and really the project complexity and some other things come into play there. And so the really exciting kind of hot off the press thing that I want to share is that we're rolling out some new procedures with the State Water Resources Control Board, along with the regional boards, to help project proponents and lead agencies know which lane to go down with the new statewide restoration general order and the accompanying program EIR. So this is brand new. We've been doing SERP meetings and consultations for several months now, and we plan to invite the State Water Board and the regional board where the project is, so that we can work through this together and really choose the right path for each project. So that's very exciting, because we really have two expedited CEQA tools now that we didn't have just a year ago. And then for those of you who've engaged with us regarding SERP, you all are early adopters, and I just want to thank you for working with us. This is a brand new process. We're learning, you're learning, we're all working through this together, and I'm feeling pretty good about where we are. And in closing, I feel also very, very lucky to hear about all these projects all over the state, and am super excited about all the great work that's happening. And so that's my brief introduction. It wasn't all that brief, was it?
Thanks, Brad. No, that's great. I mean, we're all very excited to be tracking this and to be learning from it. And it's still very new,
Yeah.
and so we're in this learning phase. And so in the spirit of that learning, maybe you can set the stage for us a little bit with just simply how many determinations have been completed to date and what kinds of projects are they? We're going to hear from two of them shortly. I love that those of us who've done it, you call us SERP graduates. I think we need shirts or something made for that. But tell us a little bit about just those metrics.
Yeah, so we've completed 9 to date. And so that's and they've been pretty diverse in terms of location. Many of them have had something to do with river restoration. We've got the Merced River in Yosemite Valley, right under Half Dome, as one iconic location, but nearly as iconic, we've got the Garcia River, the Truckee River, coastal wetlands, estuaries, riparian plantings, and wildlife connectivity, as well as stream flow enhancement as different parts of projects that have been through the process. And so right on the queue and about to be submitted soon, we also have some additional project types. We've got a couple fish passage projects, meadow restoration projects, desert wetland creation projects, and an invasive species removal project, just to name a few that are coming. So that list keeps growing, and it really is, SERP is really open to a lot of different expressions of restoration.
And so as that list keeps growing and as word gets out, how are you anticipating meeting the increased demand for this exemption?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so one thing to keep in mind is that we have a statewide cutting the green tape strike team, and our team isn't necessarily bound by our regional boundaries and that sort of thing. And so we have a lot of flexibility to work across those boundaries and help each other out. And so just as an example, got a meeting this afternoon. It's a SERP consultation for an Arundo removal project on the Santa Ana River. And our staff from North Central Region 2, which is in the Sacramento area and that part of the world, is going to be helping us with that project. And so we are able to kind of reshift, allocate resources and pivot, as well as I mentioned before, as we do this more and more, we're learning how to do it more effectively and efficiently, and so are the lead agencies. And so when we get a really tight, well thought through lead agency determinations document, it is actually quite quick to put together the concurrence that the director is going to sign. And so I feel like we have a lot of capacity still to do a lot more of these. you know, and of course, you know, that does sometimes involve shifting priorities and that sort of thing. But even though SERP wasn't necessarily something we were expecting when this program got funded, certainly CEQA is one of the places where there's a lot of time and money savings to be had. And so it really is a top priority for us.
So for people who are just learning about it now, where can they get more information? How would they start the process of applying to use this exemption?
Right. So all you have to do is Google CDFW and cutting the green tape or CGT or anything like that. You'll find our webpage, and we maintain an inbox, which is the easiest, fastest way to connect with us. It's restoration permitting at wildlife.ca.gov. And get in there. We usually respond to you the same day, and we'll set up a consultation and kick things off, and we'll talk about SERP as well as any other of our new tools that might apply to the project.
And Desiree, thank you for dropping that link in the chat. I was about to do that as well, but you beat me to it. So why don't we shift now to bringing some of your graduates onto the screen. We've got Kristan Culbert with American Rivers and Jim Robbins with my organization, the San Mateo RCD, who've recently worked to complete some projects for you, and see if we could have them join us on screen and ask them a little bit about their experience with this. And then if during this time, if there's a key question that I did not get to that you would like me to ask the panelists, if you could put it in the Q&A, not in the chat. I have a hunch the chat would be hard for me to see everything that's going through, but if you can put it in the Q&A, that would be great. And then I can try to ask this of them. So Kristan, Jim, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it. And let me ask you each, Kristan, maybe we can start with you to just very briefly describe what project used the exemption and why your team decided to use it.
Sure. So first, hello everyone, and thank you for having me here today. So just briefly about this project. This project is formally called Riparian Area 1 Restoration. It's a small, tiny restoration project at a larger site called River Garden Farms. And to kind of situate you as to where this is located, this is near the tiny town of Knights Landing, near the Sacramento River, about 20 miles northwest of Sacramento in California. So a little bit about this project site. This particular project site is about 19 acres on a levee bordering an irrigation canal. And the objective of this project is to revegetate this project site. And it's really part of a larger, broader effort to really explore possibilities and opportunities to do restoration on this site of land called the River Garden Farms area project site that has historically been used for agricultural purposes.
And the decision, why'd you choose to try the SERP?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, this was a pretty simple project, so we were hoping to take advantage of, a simpler process and hopefully save a little bit of time and a little bit of funding, since this is a grant-funded project. We also decided to ultimately do this largely at the request of the agency at the time, the Delta Conservancy, who had agreed to be our CEQA lead agency for the project, pending on us trying out the SERP process.
And Jim, for San Mateo RCD, a place very near and dear to me, can you tell us a little bit about a brief description of that project and why our team decided to use the SERP?
Sure. Well, also good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here. So our project, the formal name of our project is the Buteno Creek Backfield Floodplain and Stream Flow Enhancement Project. That is quite a mouthful. To simplify that, this project is near the town of Pescadero, sort of along the San Mateo coast, south of San Francisco. It's on Butno Creek. It's on a piece of land owned by the Peninsula Open Space Trust, actively farmed piece of land. The project itself will do a couple things. The project will create about 4 acres of very low stage 8, stage 0. You can argue about that floodplain inset with the creek. It'll also create a few acres, about 1.5 to 2 acres of sort of transitional floodplain. Also, the project will consists of roughening the channel and creating a lot of complexity in about 1,800 linear feet of channel. So really helping increase complexity, reverse incision, and really kind of bring that piece of channel back to life. And then the other part of this, which I think is maybe ended up being the more complicated but unique part of this, is it also will protect stream flow. The project includes taking a somewhat defunct 5-acre reservoir, expanding it to about 13 acres. It's a small pond. And with that expansion, having the farmer agree to a forbearance agreement to not divert stream flow. Basically, we haven't hammered out all the terms, but basically from July through October. So the project does all kinds of in-stream work, creates new floodplains. It actually helps flood a large floodplain, increasing the frequency of inundation there, and it protects stream flow. So it's sort of it's an everything if you're a fish kind of project.
So Jim, following on you, can you tell us how the SERP process worked for you, what your experience was like, the timeline, the costs, roses, thorns, you know?
Yeah. Well, let me say a few things. We did a little bit of trying to figure out whether this would actually fit under the categorical exemption for small habitat, and the project ends up the actual footprint of construction is only it's a little over 6 acres. So it's a pretty small project in terms of sort of what we've been thinking about for SERP. And I'll just say the other thing that sort of jumped out to us was there is some infrastructure that has to be built in order to implement the goals of the project. So for example, we have this pond, which needs to be expanded in order to protect stream flow. So we knew that there was some complexity.
Jim, may I just jump in? I'm not sure that everybody who's joining us today knows what you're talking about. So this is a statutory exemption in CEQA for projects of any size. And Jim was comparing it to a pre-existing categorical exemption in CEQA for small scale habitat restoration projects up to 5 acres in size. And so this just exceeded those 5 acres. Sorry to interrupt you, Jim. Just want to make sure everybody was.
Yeah, so that's the key point. The other key point is the way that SERP is written. It's not explicitly focused on big infrastructure. And we needed to work, we knew that this was an issue that was going to keep coming up with stream flow protection projects. So one of the main reasons, well, there's really 2 main reasons that we went the SERP route. One, because we really wanted to test it. We talk a lot about being collaborators. We really wanted to be patient, work with Brad and his staff, and really kind of go through some of the bumps and bruises and twists and turns to see how a project like this, that's not simple but multifaceted, would really fit into SERP. So we took it on partially because we felt confident that we had enough time and patience and expertise to really work through what could be difficult. It turned out not to be terribly difficult. We originally had about a $38,000 budget to do a mitigated neg deck. I think from a cost, so for the CEQA document, from a cost perspective, I think in total, we may have spent about $10,000. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me to do the whole consultation. And I think one thing I'll note in the cost savings there, that's not a huge amount of money, but when you aggregate that over time, it really adds up. And I think the other thing I'll just mention is some of that $10,000 was spent on things like doing a formal cultural resources report, doing a really good biological inventory, writing a really strong project description that really described the project. Those are things we have to do for all of our other permits and approval. So it's not like we did that just for SERP. We have to do that anyways. So that money spent is money that's well spent across the budget of the project. So we saved money. The project did take maybe 2.5 to 3 months longer than we expected, but a lot of that was just some back and forth. And we expected this. And I will say that never once was the back and forth combative. It was just great questions back and forth, really thoughtful. We got just really good questions. It appeared to us that Brad's staff was really carefully reading everything we'd submitted and asking us technical questions that frankly, we should be able to answer. So it wasn't a lot of busy work. It wasn't anything like that. Yeah, so it worked really well. Kellyx, I think that may have answered your question, but I'm not sure if I fully answered it.
I think it did. I think one of the things that I would flag there is one of the concerns that we had, one of the unintended consequences of some of the efforts to streamline regulatory compliance for environmental restoration is that with the limit of 5 acres in the categorical exemption, sometimes we were doing smaller projects. We were doing less restoration so that we could get the exemption. And so this is probably an example like that, where it was, it was a little over 6 acres instead of 5 acres. We probably would have made a smaller project.
Absolutely.
So that we could have gotten the exemption, but now we're doing more restoration to meet this. Kristan, can you tell us a little bit about how the SERP process worked for your team? Timeline, costs, roses and thorns, what worked, what didn't?
Yeah, Jim, it was kind of surprising to hear you say that, you kind of laid out the cost that you estimated of going through the SERP process versus going through the traditional route and hiring a consultant and everything. That is exactly what I was going to say. It would have been about $38,000, $39,000 to hire a consultant and go through this process, as well as about $10,000 in staff time versus going through this process. Of course, we skipped hiring a consultant to do this, and it took about 10 grand in staff time. So I would say that the costs were about the same for us as well. And yes, there was definitely that cost savings there. As for timeline, our situation was a little bit complicated by the fact that we were working under a rather tight deadline. We were actually doing this process of fulfilling CEQA requirements on behalf of another organization, Audubon, California, who's actually managing the implementation of this project. And their funder for the project, WCB, was really hoping to complete CEQA before awarding funding so that this project could move forward. So, we had a deadline kind of looming over our heads, and it was just really wonderful to have the lead agency at the time, the Delta Conservancy, and CDFW. Brad, your team is amazing. Thank you, and thank you all for just working with us under this incredibly tight deadline. So that is a huge, big, beautiful rose. The cost savings and just having a really supportive, cooperative team from both CDFW and our lead agency. Another thing that really worked out for us was that, I'm not quite sure if this was applicable to others, but by really requesting that we go through this process, sounded like enabled the Delta Conservancy, our lead agency, to skip assessing any fees that would otherwise be incurred by other agencies that we had approached as serving as lead agency for this project. So that was another source of cost savings. Let's see, thorns. I would say that, while there were significant cost savings, the timeline was a bit slower compared to hiring a consultant and completing this. We had anticipated that a consultant would take about 3 months, and there were delays for this SERP process that came from having to do a little bit of extra outreach on behalf of CDFW, which again, just as a condition of working in the Delta, it's a complex place to do work. And there were quite a few very detailed references, which again, making sure that we're doing our due diligence. Thankfully, we had a really great grant application to pull our sources from, and had a lot of very detailed project descriptions and background information available. But I imagine that if you don't already have that on hand, it might be a little bit difficult and would take a bit of extra time to actually get that done. And lastly, this is really just, kind of a wrinkle that seems to have been applicable to our project due to this kind of change in last minute switch in our lead agency. I'd mentioned that initially we worked with the Delta Conservancy, who graciously, decided to take that on in the beginning. And then WCB, our funder, kind of took that on towards the end as we were getting a bit closer to the concurrence and the approval of the project. So there were a bit of wrinkles, but I would say that it was a really great learning experience, and I'm really excited to just do this again and see this process get smoother and faster and better. But yeah.
Thank you. So in talking with SERP graduates, it seems like what you're touching on, Kristan, was kind of a common theme, which is that there were some reduced costs in terms of what the cost may have been if they had done an exemption, but not as many costs as they would have expected for an exemption, particularly when they consider their staff time, and the amount of back and forth was a bit onerous. Largely what I've heard from people was that, again, Brad, sort of universal acclaim for your team for the intentions and thoughtfulness and kindness, feeling like everybody was kind of rowing in the same direction. Like it was actually not just applying statute, but trying to advance conservation and restoration, and that sort of that culture change was it's really significant in getting one's work done. But definitely it came up about how much back and forth or how much detail was provided. Jim, was this your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, there was a fair amount of back and forth, but from my perspective, we expected it. The project, we particularly picked a small but complicated project versus, we were trying to figure out which variables to sort of test out and pilot and which not. So there was a lot of back and forth. Again, my take on it is for smaller, simpler projects, the categorical exemption is a lot easier if it fits. And if you have something that's a bit more complicated and a bit larger, you should know most of that information. It's sort of incumbent upon us, I think, as the practitioners to be able to answer most of those questions. So I think that was pretty consistent for me as well. And again, we expected it to take a little, unlike Kristan, we didn't have a terrible looming timeline, which is another reason we picked this project, because we knew that, if it took a bunch of twists and turns, the project wasn't going to, fall apart. We had the space. So yeah. Yeah.
And as someone who was involved in those early conversations to use the SERP, I should note, Brad, that we wanted to be a partner. And so we were willing to have it take a little longer because we wanted to help the state pilot this. And so then my question to you, Brad, following up on what folks described to me is it your sense that you said before, you think that you're going to be finding efficiencies and that sort of thing? Like some of this it was a new program. There were a lot of eyes on this. You're bringing it on board. Do you think that some of this will be more simplified moving forward?
I do. And, and the RCD's project was really complicated. And the win there was that it combined physical habitat restoration with a flow enhancement. And guess what? Flow enhancement is restoration. Mm-hmm. And we had to work really hard behind the scenes to get that message through. And it was worth every bit of the back and forth, in my opinion. Now, Kristan's project is the simplest project on the planet, practically, except for one thing. It's not even in the Delta. It was about 20 miles away from the Delta, but it was close enough that the department felt like it needed to reach out to the Delta counties and do some due diligence, because there is a fear of restoration in that part of the world, being connected with other projects, water exports and things along those lines. And so, so again, you guys are the early adopters, and we did it. And I think it's, new projects, new types of projects, all those things. The back and forth is really an investment in this program. So thanks for that.
Along those lines, Brad, when you and I spoke at some point earlier, you were saying that one of the benefits of this is all that behind the scenes back and forth ended up having some collateral benefits.
Yeah.
Can you maybe speak to that and share that with folks? I thought that was really exciting.
Yeah, one of them that was really kind of sometimes you get a setback and it's discouraging, and sometimes those setbacks lead to new opportunities. And so Kristan mentioned it already, the original lead agency and WCB at some point decided to switch, and the lead agency was shifted to WCB. And that was a really big deal. And WCB has agreed for this project to be the lead agency under SERP for a project that they're funding. I think that concept may come into play a whole lot in the future and really help out, in particular, NGOs that are often searching for a lead agency for their project. And so that was an unexpected, I think, huge win that came along with that setback. So, you know, I don't feel like we've wasted any time. Some of these have been harder than others. Some have just been amazingly easy, and we just keep learning.
And Jim or Kristan, what about you? Did you? And by the way, Brad, I think that's super exciting. Some of those collateral benefits, and also I think it speaks to one of the things, certainly from the perspective of the California Landscape Stewardship Network, that we were hoping for when we engaged with this whole process, is starting to accomplish some of that sort of culture shift. You know, how to create the conditions for the people who every day have to issue permits or do regulatory compliance to be able to innovate, to be able to go beyond applying statute to advancing projects. And what you're describing is exactly that happening in the hallowed halls of Sacramento. So I think that's pretty exciting. And then maybe Kristan and Jim, if either of you, did either of you in your projects experience any collateral benefits to working with the SERP? Or do you anticipate any?
I'll mention one that I think is already playing out and one that we're kind of fantasizing. First of all, so the project I talked about, it's an in-stream flow enhancement project, so it's complicated. It has water rights issues that are going to have to play out. I won't say it's because of SERP, but I will say going through the SERP process and at the same time working with CDFW's in-stream flow and water rights team, it hasn't been simple, but I think the two things are sort of really nice kind of companions to one another. And I think that from what I understand, the fisheries biologists and the water rights folks feel more comfortable with our project and with sort of finding solutions, knowing that it's sort of been blessed. I guess the one thing I will add is, this is where my fantasy is, that I am hoping that the time comes where the SERP process is sort of that first door you walk through at the department, and maybe with some of the other agencies. I'm hoping that when we submit our 1600, our Lake and Streambed Alteration Agreement, that if it's not some of the same people, there's at least a real piece of connective tissue, so we don't have to start from scratch with the same sets of questions and some of the sort of more typical roadblocks that we might hit, but that we've really sort of streamlined the process soup to nuts. So that's sort of that's the fantasy collateral benefit.
And Brad, I know that you've been doing a lot of thinking about 1600s and some of this sort of connective tissue. Do you want to take a moment to speak to that before I ask Kristan the same question?
Yeah, I think Jim's fantasy is very similar to my own, which hopefully is not a fantasy. It is a, you know, it's a set of actions that will result in something concrete. Yeah, you know, there's different ways at getting at things, and so you know, the 1600 process can definitely be informed by not just things like SERP, but also this amazing platform that we've been given with the new statewide restoration general order, the EIR that goes with that. You're going to hear later about the programmatic biological opinion. All those documents give us give us a real comprehensive platform that we can then work from. We want permits to read the same. We want them to have the same measures that make sense. We don't want to recreate the wheel. We want to be efficient ourselves. And so these are all things that we're working on. We're also, as we've mentioned before in various public meetings, we're working hard on targeting potential new types of LSA agreements that are actually targeted for restoration, rather than targeting, you know, gravel extraction development or other things like that. And so there's a whole list of things that we're thinking about and working on. And really the only issue that might make that difficult, it could just be workloads and just the time and having enough staff available, because ideally restoration projects are permitted, you know, by dedicated restoration permitting staff, and that is happening a lot, but it can't happen on every single project every single time right now. But we'll see. Maybe that'll that'll come to fruition in the future.
Thank you. There's and thank you also to Camille for putting examples of approved projects in the chat, the page, because I know some people will find that very helpful in understanding, what to think about how to approach this. Also, I just asked Katie from Sustainable Conservation if she would kindly put in the chat a link to Sustainable Conservation's great webpage that lists all these different tools that people might use to simplify permitting, everything from NOAA's Programmatic Biological Opinion for Fisheries Restoration to Habitat Restoration Enhancement Act to categorical and statutory exemptions. I think they have a one-stop shop for all these different efficiencies that include the department and others. Oh, thank you, Katie, for putting those technical resources in the box. And so, Kristan, now back to you. Have you all experienced any collateral benefits of using the SERP, or do you anticipate it?
I guess the collateral benefit that I hope to see is that, as a nonprofit partner, as a, NGO, this is saving us money and staff time that frees up, funding that we can spend on other projects. So I'm hoping that other NGO partners will be able to take advantage of this efficiency and really push projects forward and not have to worry about, okay, well, I need to allocate thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars to push this forward that could be spent on other important aspects of planning or implementation. So that's always a win. And I think that's going to trickle over to other organizations. I think that it's also really exciting to hopefully, possibly, crossing my fingers, to see this be used in other projects in the Delta, perhaps. And to be able to advance conservation projects that way, given that, it is a complicated place to do restoration work and advanced restoration projects, and to see this process used to, again, we're not within the legal definition of the Delta, we're just next door, but that, potentially opens up future projects that could potentially take advantage of this process. Even in a, rather delicate place to do restoration. And yeah.
As we were, thinking through this part of the exchange, this panel, we were, there's a little bit of the story seems to be like it's whack-a-mole. There may be an efficiency here, an efficiency there, but overall, is it easier to get projects done, or are there just some pieces that are easier? And part of the reason I wanted to ask about these sort of collateral benefits is because there's this this softer aspect that I'm hearing about, this sort of the culture change piece, that where it spills over. If you're, it's a strong signal of like approval from CDFW, which might make some other things easier to get done if it's jumped through some hoops already or that sort of thing. So fingers crossed that we get to a point with, a critical threshold with all of these different efficiencies that can make it a lot easier to get projects done that are critically needed. There are a couple of questions that are in the Q&A that I'm going to ask you about. One specifically is with 11 million acres of oaklands in California, 80% of them in private ownership, mostly as working ranches. Would they be able to negotiate this process on their own? I'm not entirely clear on that, because private landowners don't need to do CEQA, but maybe this is a question about if there's public funding. I'll pass this to you, Brad, and see if you have a sense of how to answer that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if there was, if there are restoration projects being anticipated within that large expanse of privately owned oak woodland, what one would do would be to work with a local RCD is a possible great partner who can also serve as lead agency, or a nonprofit group, and start putting together a project. Is really SERP is a lead agency process. So that's something I think that's important to clarify. If you are a private, a private person or a company or anything like that, and not a public agency, then you are not required to go through CEQA. So there's, we do have, even in the world of grants as well, which I'll just address very briefly. There are certain, categories of eligible parties who can receive grant funding, and those include nonprofits, agencies, tribes, and those sorts of groups. And so really, I would advise those private landowners to find a partner who can help them navigate that world. And let's get some projects done in the Oak Woodlands.
Okay. And Gary's submitted a follow-up comment to that, saying that CDFW told them that CEQA was required for a stream bed restoration workshop on less than an acre of seasonal stream during dry fall. I'm wondering if it was CEQA or if it was a 1600 permit, and if CEQA was required, if it's because it had public funding. It's not entirely clear all the details. So I would say maybe Gary, you can get in touch with Brad's team. There's information in the chat, and you can get in touch with this team to learn some of the specifics about how the program would apply to your work. The next question is, are there any submissions that were deemed not appropriate? Any requests to use the SERP? And if so, what were factors that disqualified them?
We haven't done an official, kind of non-concurrence with any project yet. We've had a few come in that that had a few issues that we advised them that they probably wouldn't be best served by SERP. And so that the requirements are that the project is exclusively restoration, that construction is solely related to the restoration itself, and that any additional public benefits are incidental to the restoration. And so that's one place where if you have a great project, you're going to do a restoration project and you're going to build a visitor center, and you want to cover that as one project, that visitor center could kick you out because it's really not necessarily restoration. It's building a visitor center in a parking lot. And so those are, we have so far had informal conversations like that where we discourage folks from trying the SERP route, and there may be other options with the statewide restoration general order, not to speak for that program, but I think for some project categories there may be opportunities there that would still get you to a very streamlined CEQA solution.
Thank you. There are two other questions that I think we'll have time to get to. I'm gonna direct these both to you, Brad, but Kristan and Jim, if there's anything in your recent experience that speaks to one of these questions, please feel free to pipe up as well. So the first question is, leveraging and developing the capacity of RCDs will be a collateral benefit. How do we expedite that?
Well, I think just by the sheer goal that we all have to make the permitting, environmental review and permitting process simpler, easier, faster, while still being protective, I think that alone may help. And and then I'll just mention too that there's likely to be quite a bit of money coming in the next year or so to do restoration, and so there may be opportunities there to ramp up internally with small entities like RCDs, and I would just throw NGOs in that same batch, I think. And so one thing I wouldn't want to see would be to have a lot of money and a lot of potential to do projects and have no one to do them. So we really need to be thinking about that.
Great. And I'll also add, that question was from Stu Weiss, and Stu, I would also add that Brad is going to join me presumably for a panel at the California Association of RCDs conference this year, so that we can bring all RCDs up to speed on using this tool. And then the last question is, says, Jim mentioned it and I'd love to hear more. Is there anything happening behind the scenes working on better communication collaboration between permitting agencies, CFW, Army Corps, et cetera, so that we can only need to have conversations once? And it also references a multi-agency pre-project permitting kickoff meeting or something. And I'm gonna note that that has been a very significant conversation in previous exchanges and in the development of the recommendations, the initial recommendations, and in what a piece of legislation that had been proposed earlier this year. I think that's a lot more that can be handled in this couple of minutes. But maybe Brad, you can just speak to a little bit again about those collateral benefits.
Yeah, they're huge. I mean, and the challenge is finding the time to do it and having the scheduling in place and making that a regular occurrence. But I did briefly mention this. I'll mention it again for the new statewide restoration general order and the fact that we now have multiple options for expediting restoration. We are going to be doing joint meetings with the State Water Board on projects that come to us looking for SERP. Our first question to those project proponents will be, does your project need a 401 as well? And usually they do. And so that would get us into that door. I'm glad that the federal agencies were mentioned. That's a huge part of the puzzle. And I don't have a solution for that. I know it's really hard to get agency staff together. I try to do it and I fail a lot of times when I try to do that. So I think it's something to keep working on. But the benefits are enormous. Hear the same thing at the same time. One site visit, all those things kind of add up, and we really need to make that happen.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yes, Jim. And then
I just wanted to add two quick things. That I think one thing that CDFW might think about is the existing interagency meetings that the Army Corps hosts. They're sort of a classic sort of forum. They really, from my experience, have not been the perfect fit for the restoration projects. And I'm wondering if cutting green tape staff or people like that from other agencies could permeate that, and that might help with that forum. And the other thing I'll just say is I think on the project proponent perspective, when you have the general order and you have biological opinions that are programmatic and they have very, very similar, if not identical, avoidance minimization measures, including those into your project is a great way of sort of forcing everybody to the table by basically saying, we're already designing our projects to meet all of your criteria. And so that's the way that the proponent can sort of start moving stuff through the pipeline in a really unified and collaborative manner. So there's the side of the agencies and there's the side of the proponents. And thanks, Kellyx.
Thank you for that. We do have to switch over to some very exciting breaking news about this programmatic biological opinion. I wanted to ask Devin, I know you're out there somewhere. If not, Shalana or somebody, if you could post in the chat the link to the last exchange where we did a deep dive on interagency collaborations, and maybe flag the time at where that starts, so that the person who was asking that question can at least get a chance to see how that was addressed in a previous exchange. And for now, thank you so much, Jim, Kristan, Brad. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. And we will have to say goodbye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Wow, that was incredible. I really appreciate the conversation. Kellyx, thank you so much for leading us through that. That to me is the epitome of what these exchanges provide, that space to learn about a new program that's being introduced as a result of shared conversation and shared effort, and how that's being implemented in real time in different places, talking about what's working, what's not, how to think about both the project work itself and the spirit of that work. What are those outcomes? What are the benefits? And how are we continuing to learn and evolve together? So fantastic conversation. That was really fun just to listen to you all. Thanks so much, Brad, Kristan, Jim, everyone who's engaged in this. And for all the online conversation, the Q&A, the chat box was really filled with great information and just helpful responses to each other. And I think Kellyx alluded to it, but oh yeah, here it is. We have some late breaking new programmatic information to share. Glad to introduce a couple of folks here on screen with me. If I could have Katie Haldeman and Leanne Carranza join me. Katie's with the Sustainable Conservation Organization. She's the senior project manager there for accelerating restoration, and Leanne's with the Fish and Wildlife Services. And what we wanted to do here is just showcase some of the new and emerging conversation that's coming forward with the new Fish and Wildlife Services biological opinion. And I think, Katie, you're going to kick things off for us.
Yes, thank you, Shawn. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, and we'll go into, can you see that, Shawn? Everybody? Okay.
Yeah, it looks great.
Great. So hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today, and thank you so much for having me on somewhat short notice. I think most of you know who Sustainable Conservation is, but for those who don't, our organization advances the collaborative stewardship of California's land, air, and water for the benefit of people and nature. And our Accelerating Restoration team works on policy and regulatory improvements and incentives. We've been working on accelerating restoration for many years, starting with at the watershed scale with resource conservation districts, and we've since scaled up to a regional and then a statewide scale. One of the things that makes our organization unique is that we collaborate very closely with both agency staff and project proponents to help everyone achieve their collective goals. Now, today, I'm going to briefly cover the benefits of a programmatic approach, which Leanne is going to talk about more later, some of our efforts to accelerate restoration, and then Leanne will get into more detail on the new restoration programmatic, which creates a more coordinated and efficient process for Federal Endangered Species Act compliance. So back briefly to programmatics, I'm sure everybody just wants to know what's the bottom line. How is this going to save me time or money? So programmatic approvals, basically they are negotiated in advance to cover restoration project types. So Leanne will give you more detail on what those project types are, but a programmatic approach has clear requirements that can help accelerate your planning. There's predictable timelines, which gives you more certainty for grants and other planning purposes. Then they also save both applicants and agency staff time and money, which again, we've heard today, leads to more money going to on-the-ground work. Now, somewhat recently, a Public Policy Institute of California report came out that showed the National Marine Fisheries Service, who's been using restoration programmatic permits for some time, they have saved $5 to $13 million in both staff time, consultant fees, and project proponent time using a programmatic approach. So just going to break down a little more detail on why programmatic approaches to Endangered Species Act compliance can be so helpful. So here we have on the left, an individual compliance. You might develop an individual biological assessment. Your requirements may change during that process, and there's up to 135-day review. With a programmatic approach, you've got much more clear timing, specifically on species work windows for species. You have design guidelines and protection measures. Those are all laid out up front. Then you're going to have an application form rather than having to prepare a biological assessment for your project. The effects analysis is prescribed, and all that leads to a faster review process of 30 to 60 days. So sort of applying that successful National Marine Fisheries Service model, we partnered with the different regulatory agencies. You can see here using their coordinated approval processes and interrelated requirements to develop statewide programmatic permits. You all have heard about the statewide restoration general order that was approved in August by the Water Board, as well as the coordinated California Environmental Quality CEQA document or programmatic EIR. I know Brad and others have been mentioning that throughout this presentation. So just keep in mind that the project types and the protection measures that Leanne's going to talk about, they've all been coordinated with that statewide restoration order with the State Water Board. So that is something we had heard from project proponents could be helpful. And so that's a big benefit there. And with that, just a brief shout out to our many sponsors who funders who thought that expedited permitting and accelerating restoration would be important for their work. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to Leanne. She's going to tell you more about this new programmatic.
I needed to figure out where the unmute was once I started sharing my screen, sorry. All right, so I'm Leanne Carranza. I'm the Section 7 policy lead for our headquarters office now, Fish and Wildlife Service, but I was the Region 8 Section 7 coordinator at the time that I was working on the consultation. Marissa Reed is now the Region 8 Section 7 coordinator. She's on the call today. I don't know if she wants to turn her camera on, but oh, there you are, Marissa. Hello. So she'll be kind of carrying the water from this point forward, but I'm going to give you a brief overview of the consultation. That was effort among Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA Restoration Center, Fish and Wildlife Service, Ecological Services, and our program areas with support from Sustainable Conservation. Okay, so just brief history and purpose, covered project types, covered species, and then how to use the PBO. So I'm not going to read this slide to you. I just want to say that basically the purpose was to provide Section 7 consultation for aquatic restoration projects for the 3 initial agencies, at least throughout the state of California. And this kind of came about back in 2017. Sustainable Conservation had the great idea of, and talked with NOAA RC because they were working with them on something similar, that, hey, maybe we could do the same thing with Fish and Wildlife Service. And about a year later, we committed to that process. And then from that point on, we were working to come up with what would be the covered activities, what are the conservation measures. And about a week ago, we issued the final programmatic biological opinion. There, like I mentioned, the action agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service was the lead action agency for the consultation. But there's also, in addition to NOAA RC and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there's a process that would allow late arriving action agencies. So other federal agencies could use this consultation as well. Okay, so there's, as Katie shared, you basically in a programmatic consultation, you're creating what are the types of things that you're covering. And so you're coming up with the project types, the types of actions, and then the conservation measures so that we can analyze that in a biological opinion, a programmatic biological opinion, so that you don't have to do your own biological opinion every time you want to do a project, as long as it meets the criteria of the programmatic. And so here's the 10 project types. Basically, they're all restoration types related to aquatic in some way or fashion, either removing things from the streams to help stream passage, or improving the flow aquatic of the stream or as such. It also includes establishing, restoring, and enhancing all different aquatic habitat types, including upslope watershed sites and coastal dunes. So we originally had aquatic in the title, and we took that out because your project could be completely in uplands, but adjacent to aquatic habitat. And so we wanted to make sure people didn't think it was solely for if you're working in the water. We also added coverage for specific herbicides. So as long as you're using those herbicides and following the criteria in the consultation, you have coverage for those. And obviously this is just the broad level. We have much more detailed information under each of these project types in the document. So if you are working on a restoration project that is one among those 10 types, then there's a series of steps you need to walk through to see if the programmatic will be a good fit for your project. And the first is eligibility criteria, which basically is, are you truly a restoration project? And so we define restoration project, and basically you need to result in a net increase in aquatic, riparian, floodplain, wetland, or coastal dune resource functions or services. So if you're truly a restoration project, then the next question is, well, there's some things that are prohibited, and you need to make sure you're not doing those. And that's the next slide. I'll talk about that next. But as once you get, as long as you're a restoration project and you're not doing any of those prohibited acts, then there's these conservation measures that come into play. So there's general protection measures that describe, you know, when you're doing in-water work, these are the general conservation actions you would take. And then there's another set that is protective measures for species by class, such as if you have a listed fish in your project area, you would do these things to benefit fish. And then the next is species-specific protection measures. For example, okay, well, you have Lahont cutthroat trout. Are there specific measures, conservation measures for Lahont cutthroat trout? So there's a whole package of measures to ensure that your restoration project is truly, that you're going to result in that net increase in aquatic riparian floodlet. You're going to minimize those impacts. So some of the prohibited acts, I have 9 here because I have 2 on one little box, but there's 16 total. But basically it's just another, there's just more details to ensuring you truly are a restoration project. A couple I'll call attention to is that you can't have a net loss of critical habitat function or value or aquatic resource function and vernal pool habitat. So, and the bottom right one, at least I think that's the bottom right on everyone's screen, is related to Sierra Nevada and amphibians up there. And so that's a very specific one. Most of them are more general, but wanted to call your attention to that so that you knew it right away. So I don't want to read you all the species. There's 61 species. Well, actually in total, there's 72 species and 40 critical habitats covered. 61 species are covered fully with authorization for take, as long as you're meeting the requirements of the consultation. And that also is 36 critical habitats. And so they're mostly, you know, the listed species that you would most commonly encounter doing an aquatic restoration project. So amphibians, vernal pool species, plants and animals, fish. We also have other species that we address through a concurrence on not likely to adversely affect, which basically you have coverage for adverse effects, you just can't rise to the level of take, meaning harm, injure, kill. But that shouldn't be a problem because with the conservation measures we have for these species, you shouldn't reach that level anyway. So those are the species that are covered. How do you use the PBO? Well, you know, this is a Section 7 consultation, so there's got to be a lead federal agency. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a Section 7 consultation. And so you would start with either the lead federal agency itself, if they're taking on an action, or the applicant works through their lead federal agency to see if you meet the criteria that I just really briefly described. And then the process is that there's what we call an ESA Section 782 review form, and I'll show that in the next slide. But and we encourage folks to reach out, the federal agencies or the applicants, to reach out directly to your local U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Ecological Services field office to ask questions, because we want this to be super easy for everybody. And we don't want anyone to be confused or shy away from using it, because this is a great tool to provide efficiencies, not just for the action agencies and the applicants, but efficiencies for Fish and Wildlife Service as well. So you would submit that completed form through your lead federal agency to the local Fish and Wildlife Service office once it's complete. This is just what page 2 looks like of that form. So it's basically a checklist. It's a fillable PDF. So they're really check boxes and fill in the blanks and drop down menus. That's what it's composed of. We have as attached all the conservation measures, eligibility criteria, take limits, all that stuff as well, just so it's super easy for you. The BO, the programmatic biological opinion, if you ask for a copy of it with all appendices, it's 722 pages. If I knew it was going to be 722 pages, I probably would have been scared to write it, but it ended up being that long. But that's because we're doing all of the analyses up front. We're doing all that work up front so that an action agency or an applicant can just fill out this form, and once it's signed by the action agency or through, or if they provide a cover letter and signed by Fish and Wildlife Service, you have that authorization through Section 7, you're good to go. And so in order to have something that streamlined, you need analysis behind it. And so that's what the programmatic biological opinion does. There's some reporting requirements afterwards. So once, if you get approval through the 7A2 review form, then you do your project. There's a post-construction form that's due in December. And so we just made it 1 month of the year so that everyone knows when it's due and we're not struggling to figure out, did someone submit their report this month or that month? So they're all due in December. And then there'll be an annual meeting among the action agencies that use the PBO every January. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to track the projects. So, and then like the second bullet, just, our common procedure, if there's a dead or injured animal, we want to know about that within 48 hours. That's for any project that we consult on. So that's kind of the quickest way I could describe the programmatic biological opinion, because I know we didn't have a lot of time, but we're all here to answer questions, Katie, myself, and Marissa, if anybody has any.
Awesome. So, oh, they're just allowing me to start my video now. Thank you guys so much. There was so much information there, and there was a lot of behind the scenes chat going on about how exciting this work is. So thank you so much for all the heavy lifting that you've done to bring this forward. This really is truly exciting breaking news, and the banner fits. We had a good question in the chat from April, and I just want to share that with you all. She asked, with respect to prohibited acts under the statewide restoration programmatic BO, does a net loss of critical habitat refer solely to acreage? And she rephrases it. In other words, are there situations where there would be a net loss in critical habitat acreage, but a demonstrated net gain in the functions and services of that habitat that would allow for an application?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is not solely acreage based. That it's function and value. Because we know not every acre is equal. And some projects would be much more beneficial to support than to not have that project go through. And so, yeah, we wrote it that way specifically. And pretty much for many, not all, but for many of the measures, there's potential. Let's say we have a work window. There's potential for tweaking that work window as long as you can show through some sort of information analysis data or whatever that it wouldn't be any more harmful or less of a problem than the current work window. So there's flexibility built into most of the measures that we have.
Awesome, very good. And just one other quick question here: how is public access associated with restoration handled in the PBO?
We don't address public access. The purpose of the PBO is to allow projects to for restoration projects to get their authorization, is probably not the correct legal term, but get their authorization through Section 7. Now, if they have a public access related project, such as like building a trail, that wouldn't be a restoration project. But it could be improving a trail crossing over a creek so that there's more flow or passage underneath that crossing. That could qualify. So there's aspects of it that could, but not overall.
Very good. And we've got a couple of people just asking for more information. Is there a web link or place to go for more information?
So not right at the moment, but I know Sustainable Conservation is going to help with sharing the news and probably making it. Well, we're going to try to make it easy on our websites and such too, but it's just so soon. We haven't done that yet. But we can get a copy of the documents to anyone who's interested. I suppose Marissa would be the main contact for that. And then as soon as we have easy access on our websites, we can let you guys know so that you can share that with others. But I think Katie's going to put it up somewhere on your website too, right?
Yeah, we'll also have on that suscon.org/technical resources web link I shared previously, which we could drop in the chat again. But we have a sort of a permitting cheat sheet where there's 2 to 3 pages and different expedited permits for restoration are summarized there. A lot of folks find it handy, has web links. So we'll be updating that shortly with PBO application materials. Folks can also reach out to their federal agency that they're in contact with, whether it's the Army Corps or NOAA Restoration Center or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service field office person, and they should have forms as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. It was wonderful to have you join us today, share the breaking news. I know there's a lot more to do now that the news is out, including finding a way to make that easily accessible on websites and other communications tools. But thank you for all the good work. Thanks to Bob and others in the chat for adding to and supplementing the conversation. If there's anything else that comes up, feel free to continue to submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll invite this panel to answer those questions there. But for now, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Congratulations on such a heavy lift and bringing this forward.
Thanks. Bob was a big player in this, so he's well qualified to answer any questions. And I want to give a big thank you to him and Katie for us all working together on it. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks,
Really
everyone.
appreciate you joining us. All right, so we're on to the last segment of today's exchange. And what we wanted to do here is just take a step back. And in addition to all these wonderful actions that are being carried forward and advances, we often learn a lot when we just reflect back on this shared experience. What does it mean to actually try to foster and advance a conversation that leads to cutting green tape? And what does that story look like? What are the insights that we can gather and learn from, so that as we continue to evolve this conversation and look for opportunities to replicate it in other venues, how do we make sure that we're capturing those things that can really help us meet the urgency of this moment and do it in a way that leverages our individual and collective strengths? So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce 2 colleagues here, are probably familiar to many of you on the screen, but Sharon Farrell is joining us as a strategic advisor for the Stewardship Network, and many of you know her as the stalwart of the Cutting Green Tape Initiative, and Amy Mickel from Cal State Sacramento. Great to see you both. Sharon, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yep, thank you, Shawn, and thanks everyone for joining today. I mean, I'm just so impressed. I mean, all of what was shared today, I don't know about you, but I had my seatbelt on for a good point of time. So we're going to shift gears a little. I think, Shawn, you said it well about how do we learn from work like this? I mean, we've been a part of this Cutting Green Tape effort together for well over now 3 years. And much of this work had started well before the California Network, walked into Secretary Crowfoot's office and said, is there an opportunity to work in partnership, to really look at some of the barriers, to really look at how we can work together to increase efficiencies? And I think the products of the past exchanges, you're really seeing all of us step up to do just that. How do we innovate? How do we, learn from each other? And so this part of the program is really about, our commitment to say it's one thing to be a part of this journey together. It's another thing to create an opportunity to learn from that, to document our pathway and see the applicability of what we've learned and see if there are insights we can gain and gather as we move forward to increase restoration across the state and beyond. So I'm excited to sit here today with Dr. Amy Mickel, who I've worked with over the last 10 years. And I'm wondering, Amy, if you might start with just sharing a little bit about your background as it applies to developing case studies, which is what we asked of you, given your academic rigor. And also, how did you approach thinking about a case study for Cutting Green Tape?
Great. Well, thank you, Sharon. And thank you for having me here. First of all, I just want to echo what Sharon just said. It's really exciting to see the progress being made in the Cutting Green Tape front. So it's very exciting. I'm a professor in a College of Business at California State University in Sacramento. I've been there for 22 years. And my background is as a social scientist, and I earned my doctorate from a business school. My research focuses primarily on the people side of organizations, with an emphasis on organizational effectiveness and impact, in addition to systems and systems change. For the past 10 years, my research is focused on landscape scale partnerships as the organizational context. And the partnership impact model is one example of an outcome from research projects that I have led. For this particular case study, and responding to your question, Sharon, about the approach that I used, since cutting green tape is relatively new, I approached it with more of an exploratory inductive research lens. Inductive meaning that you let the data speak to you. I interviewed 32 people, of which many are on this webinar right now, and this discussion right now, this convening, and including restoration project proponents, representatives from state regulatory agencies, non-regulatory state agencies, and relevant nonprofit organizations. And so thank you all to those that participated in the interviews. I used a semi-structured interview protocol, and really my questions were designed to gain greater insight into the evolution of cutting green tape, including what it means, its influence, and really some thoughts for the future. And then looked at all these data, I analyzed data for themes and patterns, and that's kind of where I am right now.
So there's something you just said that struck me as interesting when you said what cutting green tape means. I wonder, can you expand a little bit upon that? Because it's a term we're using a lot now as we think about increasing the pace, the quality, the scale of our work.
Sure. So it was one of the things, Sharon, that was quite interesting was that there wasn't one common response. That people said different things, and those responses ranged from, some people said it's a brand, other people said it's a set of recommendations, some people said it was a program or programs, some people said it was an initiative, others said it's an extension of previous work, and some actually described it as a paradigm shift. So despite sort of the variation and the common themes despite the variation, there were some common themes that emerged. And basically, I'm using the definition of that cutting green tape. It really represents a perceived shift in collective thinking about increasing the pace and scale of environmental restoration work in California. And more specifically, CGT reflects a perceived shift in thinking about a sense of urgency for restoration work across large landscapes, best ways to accomplish this work expeditiously and judiciously, and a shift in thinking about how to reframe what really multi-benefit work looks like. But that was, to me, one of the more fun questions to ask, because there wasn't a consistent response. But so as a result, I've really tried to create sort of a definition or way that it's described that encapsulates all of those responses.
That's great. And it is interesting, right? To be able to hear that. And you've said in your answer, use shift a few times. And I'm wondering, as you think about your research and as you think about how you were just using it then, like, what are the indicators for you that there is a shift from the research that you've been undertaking?
Well, that's a great question. And so actually in this case study analysis, I am looking at it through the lens of a paradigm shift. And I'm basically working from Thomas Kuhn's seminal work on paradigm shifts in science. And really, I'm focusing first on the phases of a paradigm shift, which typically include 5 phases, and which I would say that cutting green tape is in progress, that we can see preliminary findings suggest that cutting green tape is moving through the 5 phases of a paradigm shift. And I'm looking at indicators, known indicators of a true paradigm shift. And at this stage, I would argue that while CGT is moving through the 5 phases of a paradigm shift, a true paradigm shift has yet to be realized.
Well, that's exciting on many levels. And, you've been working on this, I believe now for almost a year. And so I'm curious, what's next with the case study? I mean, we're just giving like a little bit of insights to everyone who's joined today. And, how do you hope that we use, the work that you are going to be producing?
Great. So what's next? So I'm finishing up analysis, and there are a number of insights that are emerging that can be useful for those wanting to create a paradigm shift in their work. And those will be highlighted in the report. So the report really is the case study is going to tell the story of cutting green tape through a paradigm shift lens. And it's also written to share insights with others seeking to create a paradigm shift in their work. The case study will also include a section on considerations for future research in this area. And one example of like an insight, while it may seem minor, but it was really repeated by many interviewees, is the importance of being mindful that we all have different perspectives, and to be mindful that to be curious about others' perspectives and to be respectful of the differences, and to really refrain from any form of finger pointing. So that's just an example of an insight. Again, albeit it sounds minor, but it was actually something that was repeated numerous times. So those are the types of insights that will also be included, as well as questions to consider as people continue to move through a process of creating a paradigm shift. And the paper is currently scheduled to be released early 2023. So that's the hope. And I'm really actually very excited to finish up the case study and share it with everyone. And again, I just want to thank everybody that has participated in the interviews, because it's just been a pleasure talking to everybody, but really being able to see that we are in the process of creating a paradigm shift. We're moving through the phases, and now we're starting to see that there are some indicators that eventually it looks like a paradigm shift may be realized, but we're not there yet. So,
well, thanks, Amy. And I guess from my own perspective, what you shared as an insight, I think is so important. I think about all the perspectives that have been a part of the conversations, from roundtables to exchanges, to development of reports, to all the incredible work our agency partners are doing. It's critical, right? None of us own a solution. It's going to take all of us working together to continue to develop solutions, to iterate solutions. I mean, today's conversation alone was the sharing of learnings, like what can we learn? How can we build from each other? So I appreciate you pointing that out. I think it's fundamental. And, you know, maybe Shawn, I'll consider this breaking news too. It's not quite on the scale of the BO, but it'll be breaking news next year when we release the case study. So Amy, thank you for applying the academic rigor, independently working on this case study. We look forward to seeing your findings. And I'm going to turn it back to Shawn.
Great. Thank you, Sharon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sharon and Amy. Really appreciated the conversation, the insights, and yeah, it is breaking news. This is really exciting to explore the work at this scale and to bring those insights and recommendations forward and really help inform not just this effort, but other efforts. So thank you both. All right, so we are closing in at the 2 o'clock hour here. So want to invite Jen back on stage with me here. And we always close these typically with Jen and I doing a couple of top of mind reflections on what we heard and what's important to us. And I think that's interesting to some extent. At least what Jen has to share, what I have to share is typically a little bit drier. But today, I just felt like this was such a rich exchange, and we covered so much ground, from the opening orientation around this moment in time in California and the impacts of climate change and how we're all really sorting about our roles, to the awards around the hidden heroes and the specific roles that people are playing to really make an impact and make a difference, to the conversation on SERP that was so rich, to the breaking news on the PBO, to the conversation on the case study, that I thought, in closing here, I'd invite each of you to jump over into the chat and share one key insight or takeaway to you that really stood out. And I'm guessing because we all come from different perspectives and hold different insights, that you're going to come up with a really great assortment of different things. But I just want to leave that last reflection with you, and then Jen and I will close things out. So if you want to jump over into the chat, just take a moment to think about that one key insight, reflection, takeaway. I'd love to hear that from all of you. Jen, I'm gonna put you on the spot. What did today feel like for you? What did you learn? What are you excited about? So much to cover.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I say this every time, but every time I mean it even more, which is that I really feel the momentum in cutting green tape. I feel it's interesting to hear the conversation about this being a paradigm shift. I've always thought of it as a movement, and maybe they're similar or different, but we're pulling together all these threads of people that are working maybe on their own or had been working on their own, but now see themselves as part of this larger effort. And I feel like that creates its own weather, right? The more people see success, the more they want to be part of that success. And just the fact that we had so many new folks on this call today, it got me excited. People are starting to see that this is important. They can make a difference. They're going to learn from others. This community is being built. So that excites me a lot. And I said at the start, that when we handed out the hidden heroes, it's not sexy. Some of you know that I'm a former regulator, so I know what I'm talking about. But to see Leanne come on and talk about this programmatic biological opinion, which I was at the early 2017 conversations when we started that process, and I was like, man, this is going to take about 5 years. And here we are. It's done, and it's exciting, and it's going to really make a difference. So kudos to folks getting that across the finish line. That takes perseverance, really, to do something that big and to put all the work in at the start. So that's pretty rambling, Shawn. You were probably looking for something much more coherent, but I really feel the energy and the momentum, and I think we live in very, very challenging times. But as the secretary said, we're the ones who are going to make the difference, and we have this incredible opportunity. And I'm proud to be part of this community of people that wake up every day thinking, how can I make the world a better place? How can I protect this planet for all of us? And so I just always leave these conversations more excited and more hopeful. And today is no exception.
No, I think that's perfectly said. I was thinking about, gosh, we had such a diversity of focus areas and threads of conversation and different perspectives. And what unites all that is the energy, the momentum, the community that we're building together, and how that continues to grow and evolve in such a meaningful way. And so I thought you just nailed it by saying that's what drives us, that's what motivates us, that's what sustains us as we move forward. So really exciting. And so let's leave it there. Let's say that's the final word from Jen Norris in terms of the excitement that she's feeling and that I want all of us to feel as we leave today's exchange. Just one last thing, if you've got time, I'm going to ask Devin to drop an evaluation survey into the chat. We always love your feedback on what you liked about these exchanges, what worked well, what might we do different, what topics are you interested in exploring as we move forward. Really want this to be a place and a space for you and your voice and your experiences, and how we can continue to work together to make sure that everyone has a role to play. So thank you very much. Jen, I see you on the screen, so if there's any final words you want to share?
Just thank you all for putting this together. We always really appreciate the folks that do all the work behind the scenes to make these conversations possible. And especially thanks to you, Shawn, for leading us through it. So with that, everyone, you get 5 minutes of your day back. You can pay me back later the next time we meet. Have a good afternoon.